It's time for Lord Don's Treehouse of Terror. Oh, wait, no, that's The Simpsons. Lord Don's Crypt of... Oh, no, that's someone else. Lord Don's Vault. No. I know. Lord Don's Library of Horror. Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful multiverse and more particularly from Lord Don's Library of Horror. And this week we have a film for you. And that film is Messiah of Evil. And with a title like that, how can it be bad? Or perhaps how can it be good? It's an equal opportunity question. This is actually one of my favorite films. I discovered it through YouTube of all places, but I would consider it to be a guilty pleasure. I find a number of things about this film very compelling, and a number of them are just plain mysteries as to why they made those decisions with what could have been a top-notch film, and instead is a very interesting cult film. This film came out in 1971, but they recognized what they had done, and it did not actually premiere until 1973, when it was retitled and I think perhaps a little reworked and introduced to the world in the form that it is in now. And it is definitely a late night horror type of film. And if you're like me, you love that about films like this. The other thing about this film that that is very interesting is the high caliber of some of the people who are actually involved in creating it, compared to how it came out versus other things they did. And with me is my co-host, Cosmo, who will talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about Hewitt and Katz, Howard Hewitt and Gloria Katz, who helped produce and write this film. They went on to work on American Graffiti, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and of course Howard the Duck, which sometimes their name gets attached to. But it's quite the diversity, and I think you stated it well. Equal opportunity. They're not afraid to spread the talent across all of that. The interesting thing is Walter Hill may have gotten his start there. He was in the opening scene, and of course he went on to be involved with Alien in 1979, and some of the films like, the 48-hour type films in the 1980s, the heavy cops and robbers and westerns. So it's very interesting that you see these characters, like you said, pop up. Maybe the only film for a day, but there's quite a few hidden gems like that in this film.
There definitely are. So with that, let us begin our film, Messiah of Evil.
I gave my message to the wind. I told my story to the sea. No one else is listening to me. The hidden truth clear in my mind. Soon all alone I will not find. Somehow, somewhere, someone may hear me. Hold on to love, hold on to love, but beware of men who became beasts of prey. Many are they, child without a soul, men without a heart, their 100 gold to tear your life apart. How many are they? Don't try to find out, stay away. They are without shame. This is not a game. From them stay away, or you could become one. I say, I gave my message to the wind. I told my story to the sea. Somehow,
They say that nightmares are dreams perverted. I've told them here it wasn't a nightmare, but they don't believe me. They nod and make little notes in my file, and they watch me now, waiting for me to scar my breasts, to eat insects maybe, or to lift my dress like some crazy old woman and urinate on the floor. But there's so little time left. You've got to listen. Not far from here, there's a small town on the coast. They used to call it New Bethlehem, but they changed the name to Point Dune after the moon turned blood red. Point Dune doesn't look any different than 1,000 other neon stucco towns. But what happened there, what they did to me, what they're doing now, they're coming here. They're waiting at the edge of the city. They're peering around buildings at night. And they're waiting. They're waiting for you. And they'll take you one by one, and no one will hear you scream. No one will hear you scream!
I went there looking for my father. He used to spend winters in Point Dune painting. Then, after my mother died, he stayed, and his letters became our only contact. Until recently, when his letters became more and more bizarre and finally stopped.
I have little time now. I can't write again. But you mustn't worry. And please, you must promise not to follow me. I'm afraid to see people anymore. It's better that I wait alone for it to come.
Fill her up?
Yes.
Dogs. Stray dogs.
Doesn't sound like dogs.
Has to be. Has to be dogs. I've hunted in them woods out there. Nothing but quail and rabbits. Rabbits don't make that sound.
That's Point Dune ahead, isn't it?
Why do you want to go to Point Dune?
I'm visiting somebody there.
I can't understand why anybody would want to go to Point Dune visiting. I mean, it's just a piss poor little town. It's deader than hell.
You forgot.
Hello there. Fill her up?
$2. No knock.
Yes, sir. The machine's broke, lady. Don't you have any cash?
Well, no, but this is...
That's all right. Forget it.
Oh,
Get out! Get your stamps?
nights now. I haven't slept. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Visions are coming from areas of my mind that I don't understand. July 2nd. These grotesque images keep crowding in on me. At night, I find myself wandering alone in town, catching glimpses of horrid animals I know can't be there. And along the dark beach, faces haunt me. Pale women with sleepless eyes and shadowy figures staring toward the black water.
He didn't return that night. I walked along the beach in the morning, as I'm sure he must have, coming out of the nightmares he spoke of, back into the daylight. I drove into town later. It was hot already. I saw an art gallery and I thought they might know my father. The art dealer was blind. Her fingers moved like a pale spider over my face.
Joseph Lang? Do I know who he is? We do get magazines in Point Dume, which some of us can even read.
Well, I meant I'm looking for him. And I thought maybe you knew him personally.
Point Dume isn't an artist colony. I heard he did take people out there, mostly women, but they weren't from Point Dume. There were some people in this morning looking for your father, which means some people do like his brand of art.
Who were they?
I don't know. Strangers. I think they're staying at the Seven Seas.
I'm as old as the hills. Mama delivered me herself. She took me from between her legs. Bloody little mess. Just about to feed me to the chickens. And Daddy said, maybe we could use a boy, Lottie. That's how I came into the world.
Excuse me. They said at the gallery that you were looking for Joseph Lang. He's my father, and I just...
Just come in and close the door.
All I want to know is if you knew...
Close the door. Go ahead, Charlie.
It's hard to remember back on things, but I remember the red moon my daddy told me about only once. Mama gave him a bad look when he talked about it. He was only a boy himself then. He called it the blood moon. He said that was the night that he lost religion. He learned that men could do horrible things. Like animals.
I'm really hungry. I've got the munchies.
Shut up. Go ahead, Charlie. What about the moon?
100 years ago, the moon started turning red up in the sky and things began to happen. It was like the red of the moon got up there, the closer the people were being jerked toward hell, where the people started bleeding out of control. They found children eating raw meat. It was like the town was festering with an open sore. Until the night that they... Till the night they came down out of the canyon and...
Who came down, Charlie?
I gotta go.
Charlie. Take the wine, Charlie.
Well, thanks for your kindly hospitality.
I'm looking for my father. Do you know him?
I know of him.
They told me at the gallery.
We drove by the gallery this morning. I happened to see how this works in the window. I didn't know that he lived here.
They didn't have any of his paintings there.
Well, that's popularity. Because they did this morning. I offered to buy one, and the old woman said they weren't for sale. As a matter of fact, it was a portrait of you.
Tom likes to collect things.
Like old trunks?
Old-fashioned retort.
What's a retort?
Tony, you're half girl, half child, and half wit.
Sit on it, sister.
Don't be afraid. I'm an ugly old man, but I'm harmless. It's about your daddy. They mustn't hear me. I got him fooled. I get drunk, sleep on the sidewalk like a dog, and they let me be. I ain't crazy. Hello, Charlie.
What about my father?
You have to kill him.
You're crazy.
You can't bury him. Don't put him in the ground. You gotta burn him. You gotta put fire to his body.
My, whatever will we do about Daddy? That is one of the running themes in this film. And another running theme has to do with the very interesting location of the film. One of the things I like about Messiah of Evil is that it's very Lovecraftian without actually being Lovecraft. But it has some of the same themes in it, including the very odd little town where you know things aren't right, but you don't necessarily know what it is yet. And all the people who live there are at least a little eccentric and doing things that don't necessarily make sense, as we've already seen. And this will be explained to some extent as the film goes forward, but it is one of the themes that will continue throughout the picture. This film has some very interesting casting. We've already been introduced to the most interesting players. One of them is Elisha Cook Jr., who played the old man who explains how to kill Daddy in the previous scene. And if you're not familiar with Elisha Cook Jr., he was a fixture of B horror films. He and also of noir films from the 1940s. He was a player of gritty roles, for want of a better way to put it. Another very famous horror film that he is part of is the House on Haunted Hill, I believe it is, with Vincent Price. And he gives just an iconic performance there, and in its own way, an iconic performance here. And he created this character and gave this performance in a single day of shooting, which, all things considered, makes me wonder if that's all they could afford him for. But it was one day. And he still was very compelling, I think, in that character. The other really notable player in this film is Michael Greer, who you will have noticed as the man in the suit with the two groupies, one of whom is the inimitably named Joy Bang. But Michael Greer was a fascinating character in his own right, more interesting, I think, as a person than any character he ever played. And one of the reasons for that is that he was an openly gay actor in the late 60s and early 70s, which was not an easy thing to be. He got his start, I believe, in Fortune and Men's Eyes, working alongside Sal Mineo in both the theatrical and the film version of Fortune and Men's Eyes. And he was pretty much immediately typecast as gay characters only. This, I think, is the only time he played a character who was not specifically gay. And that was partly because of the prejudice at the time. Casting directors couldn't see him in any other role because that is how they had first seen him, and because he was, again, openly gay. He was not hiding it as so many theatrical people of that time did. So this is, interestingly, his last film that he made, I believe. And although he went on to have a prolific career in a theatrical venue, but in film, this was it. I think he only did maybe 3 or 4 films altogether. But in every one, he created a very interesting character. And I would have to say that his character here is probably, for me, the most interesting in this film. He is an international man of mystery. And as you'll see later in the film, that mystery is rather a deep one. And some of the decisions made in terms of how it's presented are a bit of a mystery as well. But you'll come to understand those comments. Also, and we mentioned that the people, the creative team behind this film are also quite remarkable. And I think Cosmo had something more to say about that.
Oh, well, one thing I wanted to correct myself, it's Willard Huyck, not Howard. I might have gotten confused because of the Howard the Duck. My brain kind of
Howard the Duck
collapsed them all.
confuses everyone.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. It's and it's interesting. I'll go back and watch that again just for the sheer pleasure of, with all things film. And we talked about, the first 30 minutes of this film, you go back and watch stuff and you reappreciate it. So my first comments on watching this, the first 30 minutes seem like a little sloppy and weak in the construction, but when you go back and think about it, they're really anchoring these characters. So they're anchoring the myth, as you talked about. They're anchoring who these main actors are. And there's a bit of mystery now set in, oh my gosh, we have to use fire to destroy the leader. This is significant. So, I think, not to give away too much, but to your point about Michael Greer in particular, keep an eye on this particular character, because as it unfolds, we can share a little bit of history. And again, some of it, one wonders if there was a sequel in the works, and maybe he could have had that added to his repertoire of possible films, based on the character that's going to evolve here. But as we know, budgetary constraints in Hollywood, no doubt they affected this film. It was created in 1971, filmed over 2 months. Then it was shelved. The financiers pulled out. It was just costing too much. And then 2 years later, a Frenchman picks it up. So it becomes from Second Coming, and then it becomes a film called Messiah of Evil. But I totally agree with the Michael Greer. Let's keep an eye on that for the next segment here. I don't really have anything else to add to that other than Huyck and Katz are very interesting people throughout cinematic history. And, films like this, we talked about Suspiria, Dead and Buried, The Fog, 2001's Dagon. There's this very interesting subgenre of horror with folk horror, isolated superstition, seaside villages. And so these are interesting films. So I don't need to really elaborate on it, but I think this is of a kind that has threaded throughout horror history. And it's a very distinct subgenre. And I love watching it every time I see it.
So with that, let us return to our film.
I spent the afternoon town asking about my father. The reaction was always the same. People would only stare or shake their heads and back away.
my sixth, Arletty, called this morning. I listened to her, but couldn't let her know I was here. My voice would have terrified her. At times, I make noises which don't seem human, and my mind is letting go. I try to remember the past, my daughter, but I can't. Instead, I think of death. Always death.
What are you doing here?
You look so comfortable, I didn't want to wake you. You're very pretty when you sleep.
I'm going to take a nap. Want to come?
Later.
You can't stay here.
Just for the night. I'm willing to pay. We had a little trouble at the motel. You remember the old gentleman who was telling us the story?
Of course I do. He was mad.
Perhaps. But when they found him this afternoon, he was dead. The police came and questioned us. Needless to say, they weren't very understanding, what with me and my two traveling companions. And then suddenly, every other motel locked and shuttered its windows. You're the only other person we know.
What happened to the old man?
They found his body in the alley. He must have passed out or something. The police theorized that it must have been dogs. Well, they found his body half-eaten.
I let them stay. I never understood why. It was as if I'd come into a foreign town where I didn't speak the language and was sharing a house with people I'd have never met in my other life.
Would you like some more?
Yes, thank you.
Wind is strange.
It's like the Sirocco. It blows across the Mediterranean from Africa. I was born in Portugal, in a castle.
I thought it was a villa in Spain.
My mother was a Portuguese, aristocrat. My father was rich and American. I have a castle that stands above the sea. One of our legends tells it.
Tom, what are we doing in this shitty place?
I don't know, really. As I was saying, every race has their legends. The Romans, the Greeks, even the folk here in Point Dune had their stories. I'm interested in their story about the blood moon. What was your father doing here?
He didn't know anybody here. He could paint.
Has your father been painting long?
Laura's quite the art critic. She used to model. Photographers mostly. She specialized in exotic poses with snakes.
Oh, Tom just gets so clever when he's trying to get into somebody's pants. Listen, when you go to bed with him tonight, why don't you let him sleep?
Laura, I am tired of having to apologize for you.
Yuck! This stuff is shitty tasting.
You're not supposed to eat the fuzz.
He said he was a collector of old legends. He thought my father knew something of the legend of Point Dune. I told him my father wasn't here. He said they could wait. Are you lost?
No. I've been walking. Have you seen the fires on the beach?
No, I haven't. Good night.
There is something you could do for me.
What?
My zipper is stuck. On my vest.
I'm sure one of your traveling companions could help.
Well, they're very angry with me. They get jealous when I'm around strange women.
How awkward.
Really? So if you just... It wasn't very hard.
No. I'm sure you could have done it yourself. Good night.
Well, you don't just unzip a man and say goodnight. You are tired, aren't you? So am I. Good night.
Going out tonight?
I'm splitting.
Oh. How long?
Forever.
That's a long time. What?
Because I'm tired. I'm tired of him. I'm tired of this place.
He didn't get lost, you know. He came here on purpose. And why the hell Point Doom?
Did you like the beach? Maybe you could learn to body surf. He's just farting around with us.
Yeah, we'll let him fart around. I'm going to San Francisco. Mickey will take me in.
Who's Mickey?
He's a drummer.
What about me?
You're just a kid. You'll be all right. He's given me too many lines.
Hey, Laura. Leave me some dope, huh?
Want a ride?
What the hell? Oh, hey, thanks.
You coming back from the waiting?
The what?
The waiting at the beach.
Uh-uh.
You like Wagner?
Oh, yeah, sure. Super. You can, let me off in town. You guys must have been, working late.
Moonlighting.
Moonlight.
Everybody was out there tonight. Even the little creatures. I found a lot of them.
A lot of what?
Beach rats. What's wrong?
Nothing. What do you do with them?
Do with them? I eat them. That's what I do with them. I've got another, if you'd like.
No, thank you. I'm just going to get out right here.
You don't want it?
No. It's a very nice night to walk. Jesus.
I don't know if I'll ever look at a late night trip to the grocery store in quite the same way again. I think that I will keep my eyes open in future. But as we close out this segment, we have the father, played by Royal Dano, discussing things he's learned about this odd little town. And it is, I think, a very interesting part of this genre of horror to cast small towns as dangerous and evil places. And it is an interesting comment on perhaps how people from certain backgrounds look at people from other backgrounds. And this manifests in a couple of different ways in this movie. City versus country, generational divide, and it really is very much about how we look at the other. And that is one of the more interesting aspects, not only of this film, but of this genre. And Cosmo, I think you had some things you wanted to say about that.
Yeah, and particularly on the town, and maybe even more specifically being a seaside town, at that juncture of you've got land and you've got the ocean, and there's almost these, again, this divide, these two worlds, these two levels of otherness, so to speak. So you could almost see that subtly enhances that message, that divide, that separation. So that was one of the things that stood out for me. The other thing is when I watched that supermarket sequence, and as we continue in the film, I was reminded for some reason of Logan's Run, where you don't trust anybody over 30, and the predominance of some of the town folk, as you saw in the supermarket, they were older compared to Anitra Ford's character, Laura, who got killed in the supermarket. So you'll see more of that as you go through here. I don't want to read too much into it, but I think there's a reason they put that there. And it emphasizes, again, the otherness. And this is of a time, too, right? We come out of the 60s into the early 70s. There was a lot of that generational divide. I mean, even today, we have that. We see that a lot, where you've got Gen Z and, X and baby boomers, all sometimes kind of pitted against each other in conversations. And really, there's no need to be. But, these stories kind of emphasize the reality of being human. This is the nature,
I think that any of us who are old enough to remember 1971, which would definitely put us on the villain side of this film, will remember that the idea of the generation gap was a huge cultural touchstone at that time. And even more than it is today, I think. And so it is interesting to notice that the sinister villagers tend to be older and over 30 and are, I don't know if we can call them heroes. None of them is exactly heroic, but our group that we're meant to identify with are all quite young and hyper fashionable and very hip and very liberated.
That's it,
as opposed to the more staid local townsfolk. And I think we have to assume that there was an intentional message there. How effectively it was played out, I don't know. Particularly when being seen all these years later. But I do think that they were kind of saying that, yeah, they didn't trust anyone over 30 and they were afraid they were going to get eaten up.
Yeah.
And
well, at the same time, there's this notion of consumption.
Yeah.
Entities, humans consuming themselves to nourish themselves and stay alive. And oh my goodness, I suppose we could metaphysically or philosophically go off on a whole deep end with that conversation. And maybe that's a good one for a future time.
Yeah. Well, it also, if you remember 1971, there was a lot of a lot of struggle over the ideas of capitalism and socialism.
Sure.
And the idea of people consuming each other may be intended to be a political commentary. It would be in keeping with the time. But it's interesting, if we look at the development of human beings, one of the things archaeology has shown us is that up until the advent of what we would call civilization, we were pretty big on eating each other. We were a pretty cannibalistic species.
Yeah, and we still kind of do it. We just change the methodologies that we use, but there's still some of those time-tested principles that still exist. We just change the format. I think that speaks to us being even more sensitive to these things, especially going forward, the subtleties of how we interact with each other. And you said it well, the otherness. How do we treat otherness? Now, in this place, it may be quite justified to set up the barriers, but in other, maybe it's, sometimes you use these as examples to exercise your own thoughts about that. If you were thrown into that situation, how would you react, based on your own preconceived notions? So,
well, hopefully we'll never be thrown into quite that situation.
That's right. Well, thank goodness for film. They allow us to simulate it without getting our hands too dirty.
Yes. And so with that, let us return to our film.
July 17th. I dread the night coming on now. The fires on the beach are more numerous. And more of them are coming out at night from the town. It's more horrifying than I expected. A crazy old man told me a story today about Point Dume a century ago, and a dark stranger arriving, and the monstrous things that happened to people when he came. I thought I was going mad, but worse now. I think the hideous things I'm seeing are not imaginary.
What are you doing?
What is this bullshit? I can't get any stations in.
Laura didn't say anything else. Give a girl a pair of shoes and she walks out on you.
WUVI Radio 94 in Ludlow, the voice of Idaho.
Idaho. Idaho. Where are all the stations here? Why are they all out? There are no stations in this town. You can't hear anything. Can't we go, Tom? It's not that I care. It's just that I'm scared.
What?
I don't know.
I tried to sleep, and I fell in and out of half-dreams. I remember my father saying that you're about to awaken when you dream that you're dreaming. Tom.
Father?
I felt like I was losing control.
Losing control. It's not nightmares any longer, but something like a sickness that's still there with the sunrise. I think my body is being taken over by some unspeakable evil that's turning me into...
Arletty, what's wrong?
I don't know. The light was on in the studio. I thought maybe I thought someone was in there.
Come on, it's all right.
There was a painting.
Come on, you've been having a bad dream. Come on, get in.
I don't know what else to do. Nobody in town knows him. I don't know where else he'd go.
Arletty, I think you should leave here.
That's a great idea. Why don't you both leave? Then maybe I could get a little sleep.
Hello? Yes, it is. What? I don't... Where? The police said it must have been a mental problem. They had picked up my father twice in town. He was found wandering around before dawn. He never knew where he was, what he was doing in the dark streets. And then people reported seeing him on the beach, building a huge sculpture. The tide must have collapsed it on top of him.
After this is over and we get through with some paperwork, I think you should take the young lady out of town. We're not really a tourist town, and strangers only bring problems.
July 20th. If the cities of the world were destroyed tomorrow, they would all be rebuilt to look like Point June. Entirely normal. Quiet. Silent, though, because of the shared horror in common. I know it's hiding now beneath its stucco skin.
How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now. How is she? I remember the night my father died. He was coming home from work, drunk. His stuff
Started bleeding out of control. They found children eating raw meat. And it was like the town was festering with an open sore until the night that they...
We're never going to leave this place, are we?
Until the night they came down out of the canyon and...
Somebody came while you were gone.
Who?
I don't know. I heard this noise at the other end of the house. It sounded like somebody crying. I looked all over, but I didn't see nobody. I'm bored.
Why don't you, go to a film?
A what?
A movie.
Oh, a show. Great. I get to take the car. Then you two can be alone together.
I sat in my father's chair. The mundane scenes around me were of Point June. They were slightly distorted and foreboding, as if they were hiding some message, just as I knew now. Town was hiding some dark fear.
July 21st. My body temperature has dropped to 85. This morning I passed blood again. It's as if the thing that's taking over my body no longer needs human blood.
Melody, what's wrong? What is it?
Tom, I didn't feel it. Why didn't I feel it, Tom?
I don't know. It's as if the thing that's taking over my body no longer needs human blood.
Father had beautiful hands. They were fine, long, almost feminine fingers. He was ashamed of them in a way. He used to laugh and say that after the revolution he'd be shot. That pale hands were the mark of a decadent life. That's how I knew. Tom, why did they lie to me? Those weren't his hands. They were coarse and large. That wasn't my father.
You sure?
Yes!
God. Tony.
You can't take all three of us. Wrong.
isn't always milk and honey, free without care. Life isn't always fair and sunny. Life isn't always...
Your good little tin Marshall. Boss has got to be paid for his tune. Not just with money.
Alas, poor Tony. She was only with us for a moment, and then she was gone, much like the actress who played her. Tony was played by the actress Joy Bang, who not quite sure where she got that name or how she functioned with it, but it was her stage name. It was not her birth name. And she only made like 4 films and had a short career as an actress, which is not uncommon for all of those who are very successful in the acting business. There are many who are only in it for a few years, and she was one of them. She is still living today, but she's been out of the acting business for a long time. But if you look at the scene we just saw, what we were saying about a generational divide is pretty obvious. We have Joy Bang as the ostensibly teenaged figure in peril of all of these middle-aged townsfolk who are shuffling up behind her while she is obliviously watching the film. And I think there are a number of things that you can kind of extrapolate from that these filmmakers were trying to say about their ideas about generational divide and small town populations. But I wanted to take a moment and talk a bit about the visuals of this film. And this scene is not an exception. The theater is nothing special. I mean, it's basically all red, as I recall. But the way they show it is very effective. And that's true of the cinematography throughout this film. It's true of the places they've shot the film. It's true of the costumes they've put people in. It's all very effective. More effective than the finished product arguably deserves, but it is part of what draws me back to it. The visuals of the house where Arletty and the others are staying, absolutely stunning and very much of the era, the kind of artwork we see there. The way they show the town itself is very a very artistic way of looking at this very prosaic area. The way the characters are dressed is very expressive, very elegant. This reminds me of a number of films of this era, which did focus heavily sometimes on that artistic element. We mentioned Suspiria earlier, and I feel like it does a lot of the same thing. If you look at Suspiria, half of the story are the buildings that it's being filmed in. From the very first scene to the very last, the buildings are, the architecture is almost a character in itself. The main story was shot in an Art Nouveau mansion, I believe in Vienna, that was due to be destroyed. It had been slated for demolition, but they filmed the film in it before that could happen. And if you look at the architecture, it's just stunning. And the way that it's used in the mise-en-scene in the film is just stunning. And I think a lot of those same qualities are present in Messiah of Evil. Again, the mansion where Arletty is staying has a very artistic feel to it. The way that it's filmed is very artistic. And I think that was definitely a feature of films of the 60s and 70s, more so than I think most films today. And it's one of those things that has endeared this film to me. And
yeah, and I think your point on the style and look of the film, I mean, you made me think about the killings. They're pretty effective, but you don't see really blood. Yeah. So that was an interesting time, the early 70s, because we earlier had Night of the Living Dead in the late 60s, and some of these films are starting to push the boundaries of violence. And indeed, a little bit later, we'll see a little bit of that where it does show up. But I thought this killing was pretty effective in the cinema for not showing a lot, but leveraging your imagination to imagine, oh my gosh, this person's getting eaten alive here. I think they did a good use of that, given the budget. And I heard that probably the most expensive thing was something Michael Greer wore as part of the film. So that tells you, if that's the case, they had to really stretch that money. And that no doubt goes back to that story of the finished product that we have and how that kind of had to get, put together 2 years later to what we see today. But yet you imagine what conceivably was left on the cutting room floor, and conceivably there could have been a good sequel there as well at some point. We can talk more about that later, but yeah, the look of the film, the killing styles, I think they're effective in some of the ways they do it for not necessarily showing a lot in all cases and leaving it up to your imagination. There's something to be said for that.
I think that the advent of the slasher film wasn't necessarily good in every way. Because prior to that, they were less inclined to show the violence on screen, and they had to imply it. And I think sometimes that was more effective. Not always, and you start in this period of the early 70s to see the movement toward being more graphic. But in a lot of ways, I think that forcing the audience to use their imagination was also a very effective way of dealing with things. And you refer to one of the things that really pulls me back to this film again and again, the fact that it has all of the elements of a great film except the finished product. The finished product has that feeling that they cobbled it together at a later point And it leaves you with so many unanswered questions, which, I mean, you'll see as it goes on. And I think you'll have your own questions about what certain things mean. And, you know, sometimes not having the questions answered is a compelling thing in a film.
Well,
But in this film, they
Eraserhead was
definitely don't answer them.
Yeah, and we talked about Eraserhead being a classic example. Not everything's
Yeah.
spelled out each time you watch it. Your context may be different. You may see something different. That's a classic film. That's a piece of cinematic history. And a lot of films are like that. They stand the test of time because based on the changes in times and the world, you may come to see it a little bit different. And it's amazing, some of those films that aren't concrete in answering everything, sometimes those are the ones that live the longest, you know, and have a cult
That's true.
following.
I do find that a film that leaves you with questions is sometimes better than one that leaves you with answers. Not always, but definitely sometimes. And with that, let us continue our film.
live a couple blocks from here. We were watching TV when we heard them. They came crashing through the sliding glass door, making that noise, that awful noise. We tried to get the children, but they already had them in the hall. They went after them like sharks. My husband dragged me out, and we ran to some neighbors who had guns, but it didn't stop them. They kept attacking anyway. But he's still there. You've got to help.
I can't.
What's wrong?
Your eye.
Too late. Starting.
I'm very sorry.
July 28th. I cut myself this morning. My finger was nearly severed. Without feeling any pain, I ripped it off at the joint. I felt nothing at all. I'm disintegrating rapidly.
I tried to warn you. I dragged one of the bodies they killed up on the beach, but you still didn't leave. There's little time left. You'll have to go. Tell people on the outside. Warn them that what happened 100 years ago is happening again.
What?
Listen. Please listen. He came
100 years ago. A hunter first saw him.
He told the hunter that he had been a minister and had come over the mountains with a Donner Party. He passed that horrible winter with them and saw men commit hideous acts. He said that he himself had eaten human flesh, but had survived because he had faith. Faith in a new master. The hunter didn't understand when a dark stranger said he was spreading this new religion. When they found the hunter, he looked as if he'd been attacked by some kind of animal, half-eaten. As he was dying, he told them of the dark stranger. And they assumed he was delirious. When he went into a fit, biting at them like a rabid dog, they shot him. The dark stranger watched the chaos. And he walked into the sea and said he would return 100 years later to a world tired and disillusioned. A world looking back to old gods and old dark ways. Our world. You've got to go now. Most of this town is infected. It's got to be destroyed before the moon turns blood red. And he returns to lead them up the coast and inland into the cities.
We can both go.
They took me, and they did this to me. I already tasted human flesh.
You gotta kill him. If you love your daddy, you will kill him. Can't bury him. Don't put him in the ground. Gotta bury him. Put fire to his body.
that scene was certainly on fire. We return to our film chat, and there are a number of interesting things that we've just seen. One of them is the Blood Moon. Another is the Donner Pass, and of course Tom encountering the townsfolk, and Arletty encountering her father. A touching father-daughter reunion, if ever there was one. And it's very interesting that they've introduced the Donner Party in the middle of this story. And it's also interesting to notice that this happens in a number of horror films. The Donner Party, I guess, has definitely affected, definitely left its impression on certain people's minds. It certainly left an impression on history. And if you're not familiar with the Donner Party, in which case I can only wonder how you would not be, but they famously were trapped by winter snows and forced to eat one another to survive. One of the famous examples of relatively modern cannibalism that was very shocking to 19th century America. One of the things that's interesting about the Donner Party, however, is that they were not as isolated as they thought. There were numerous Native American peoples in the area, and they actually were aware that this was happening and they wanted to help. And they attempted to approach the Donner Party with supplies to help them survive. But the members of the party were so afraid of the idea of dealing with Native Americans that they shot at them. And so they gave up this plan and let them go ahead and starve. The Donner Party had Native American guides with it, which is why those local people had approached to help, but that response did not help the situation. And once they'd been shot at, of course, the local Native Americans did not return and left the party to its fate. But it didn't actually have to have that fate if it had been a little less prejudiced. And this is a little bit of an object lesson, I think, that is often left out of this story. So now we've seen the Dark Man, the actual Messiah of evil. And we've seen that he originates with the Donner Party and that cannibalism is part and parcel of his cult, I suppose we would say. And that the symbol of his coming is the blood moon. And that he first came during the blood moon and he is to return during the blood moon, which is when the moon is seen to be blood red. Now, of course, this is an actual phenomenon that does occur. And there's also the use of the term blood moon to refer to the full moon in October, or the full moon in November, in various different systems, on the premise that this is when farm animals were slaughtered for the winter. I don't know if that's the actual origin of the term, nor is it necessarily a universal term, but you will encounter it from time to time. In this film, however, the blood moon refers to the distinct red color of the moon. And when that does happen, it usually is taken as the omen of something momentous occurring. And in the film, it's the return of the Messiah of evil. And we will shortly be seeing more of this figure, which is not to say we're going to have a lot of answers, but we will be seeing more of it. And
well, I was going to say on that note, I think there was this notion that this Dark Messiah, the timing was such that he would return when the old gods were re-worshipped.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what statements the film was trying to make about paganism or any of that nature, but there was this explicit conversation here. When the old gods are re-worshipped, that's when the time was ripe for the Messiah to return.
That is a very important point, and it's part of why this film is so Lovecraftian without being Lovecraft. The idea of the old gods returning. But they never quite make it explicit.
No, they don't.
Which to me is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, and that could be old gods that exist beyond time and space dimension-wise, like you said, Lovecraftian Cthulhu or any one of those, as the, they open the gates to let it in, so to speak. The other thing is we encountered, Arletty's father, Roy O'Donnell. So we finally see him, and of course he meets his demise. So unfortunately, in a very short time frame, Mariana Hill has gone from trying to discover and figure out what happened to her father to already having to dispatch him, unfortunately. And it's funny how these segments work out perfect. We bookended each one of these segments with somebody getting killed, but ultimately now it's her father. And she acted that really well. I thought that was a very well acted scene. You definitely saw the trauma she was feeling. I mean, my goodness, just uncovering all the layers of what he's gone through and the mystery of this town to now having to set him on fire.
I think that's part of the appeal of this film, that the performances actually are pretty decent.
That's right.
A lot of aspects of this are good. And it's just the final treatment that makes it a B film.
That's right. And you've pointed this out, Michael Greer's character, he's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
In his own way. And it's a good juxtaposition to some of the other characters. But yeah, he makes a fascinating character, and I'm sure we'll be able to elaborate on that a bit more at the close.
Yes, indeed. So with that, let us return to our film.
Arletty? 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 Arletty?
Why didn't you leave?
I came back here to get you.
Tom, it's too late.
I saw them in town. They're traveling in packs like wolves. I think the whole town. I was dreaming. We were in a forest, and it was snowing. The trees were wet, and you were looking up. And I asked you what you were thinking. said you were thinking about all the people who were born and died. All the trees went on living. Then we came to a village and we spent the night in a wood room. The next day it was so cold, we stayed in bed to keep warm.
We thought we must have made it out of the town. And then we saw the first one. They were coming down to the beach as they did every night to stare at the ocean and wait. We could go no further. They were all around, watching us, staring at us, as if we were trapped animals, caught, already bleeding, yet still struggling hopelessly. We hoped to make it to one of the small boats on the horizon, and then we would drift out and head for safety down the coast. He was having trouble with his arm. I had hurt him. And now I couldn't help him. Boats didn't seem any nearer. And the last thing I saw was the setting sun. They hadn't let me drown. They had pulled me from the water. They had prevented my last escape. That night, most of the town was on the beach. They built their fires, not for warmth, but as beacons to be seen from the black ocean. They dressed me in an old gown. I was to be offered. And following their prophecy, the moon turned blood red, and the dark stranger returned. He let me go with a story that condemned me, knowing that they wouldn't listen. He was right. I made it back, and they put me here.
He told them of the dark stranger, and they assumed he was delirious. When he went into a fit, biting like a rabid dog, they shot him.
It was like
The night the moon turned blood
the red
red,
of the moon got up.
horrible, pale creatures
Closer,
who were no
people were
longer
being jerked. Lord hell.
crashed into farmhouses and gorged themselves.
Men could do horrible things.
Foreign
Cannibals. Folks with shoes on the streets 100 years ago.
During the day, they let me out with the others. We sit in the sun and wait. We sleep. And we dream. Each of us dying slowly in the prison of our minds.
Hold on to love, hold on to love, so the moon above will not turn red with hate. Hold on to faith, hold on to love, hold on to love, but beware of men who became beasts of prey. How many are there? Child without a soul, men without a heart, they're one hungry goal to tear your life apart. How many are they? Don't try to find out, stay away. They are without shame. This is not a game. From them stay away, or you could become one. I say, I gave my message to the wind. I told my story to the sea. Somehow, somewhere, someone may hear me. Hold on to love. Hold on to love. Hold on to
That was the end. That was the end. How is that the end? How did they shoot this whole film and end it like that? That might be the single thing that brings me back to it most often, the absolute travesty of that ending. It makes no sense. For one thing, they obviously shot The Dark Man's Return from the ocean and then used only a clip or two from it. What gives with that? That should have answered all of our questions, and it's not there. The other thing, if you didn't catch it, Michael Greer, who plays Tom, is also the Dark Man. He was playing the part, and he was intended to be the Dark Man. When he was interviewed about this film before shooting it, he said that he was playing basically the Messiah of Evil, that he was the titular character. Obviously, he was intended to be, and yet the way they've edited it, he just drowns, and we're left with a Messiah of Evil with no substance to speak of. It really makes me wonder where the decision-making process was in choosing to do it this way. It seems to me that when he returned from the ocean as the Messiah of evil, this would have been a very powerful scene. It should have been a powerful scene, and it's not there.
Well, they had the snippet of somebody, but it wasn't clearly defined on who that was, to your point.
Yeah. But I believe it was him, and originally was intended to be. So why didn't they use it? I totally don't get that about this film. It would have been so much more powerful.
Yeah, and it could be also that, maybe he discovered the timing just wasn't quite right yet. Now, after all, now that we know who this is, he actually got attacked by the town folk earlier in the film in Act.
Well, that's true.
It was in Act 3, but maybe he realized, okay, maybe it's not ready yet. So Arletta, she's now in the asylum, and almost Arletty, Mariana Hill. So it's almost like now she needs to be another herald, or to try to disciple out or figure out if they can expand this mythology out beyond the town. But yeah, it almost feels like there's a sequel there because of that.
It really makes you wonder. And I certainly don't think it improves the film, but it does leave you with questions. And if you're like me, a tendency to try to find answers, which does bring me back to this film. But
well,
it just really,
I mean, there's a lot of people that love it. It was very well restored. There's a high def version. There was a song at the end, which the original distributors wanted back in the 70s, which Willard Hook hated. So they took that out of the restored Code Red version. But that tells you that, it is appreciated within horror cinematic history. And it does have a following. And these are the films I love on a Friday and Saturday night. I mean, these are my favorite times. I get off from work Friday nights. It's usually a horror doubleheader till like 3 a.m. This is going to be one of those films. It's going to be an Eraserhead, or maybe one of, some other one. It doesn't always have to have the answers. And you've talked about this yourself. You espouse that because, those do hold up across time, and you do come back at it. Like Suspiria was an example. I didn't really appreciate the opening as much, but the more I saw it, the more I appreciated it. And of course, I really love the Amazon remake of that film as well. Quite honestly, I'm a huge fan of that one. But they're of a similar type, these bizarre, isolated, trying to uncover the onion, the mystery of what's going on with this, and you're kind of flung in the middle and you're having to fight for yourself. And she comes out on the other side, but I'm not sure in what shape she is, at this point. She didn't get eaten, so she can count that as a positive.
But she was doing things like regurgitating insects and not feeling pain. And of course, there's also the question with this kind of film, was she ever sane in the first place? Is she in the asylum because maybe this has all been a hallucination?
Oh, that's a good point. That's an excellent point. And quite honestly, these are the type of films I don't quite like as much. I like this film, but this particular method of saying that everything you just saw was a dream or a hallucination, it's almost like the multi-dimension time traveling. It almost sucks out the emotional stakes that we just had, because now we can just kind of hand wave and say, well, it wasn't all real, or we can solve it with a time travel fix or something like that. I don't think the film, I think to your point, and we talk, there's probably some budget that got dropped, some film that got dropped on the editing room floor, and there's probably a director's cut that could have been done. I did research that, and a lot of people have been looking for it. I think it's just not there. I don't know where that film would be at this point to piece that together if it did get filmed. Or if
It
it
was
would even be
probably
of a good
lost.
quality. Yeah, maybe
Well,
it's
yeah.
not of a good quality, you know?
Well, that could be too, because they apparently were on quite a limited budget, filming very quickly. And if the film just didn't come out, they may not have had a second chance to redo it. That could be why they've done the ending the way they did. That actually might even be probable.
Well, the great thing is Willard Hewitt and Gloria Katz, they went on to do quite a number of big films after, and even Walter Hill, who was there briefly at the start before he got dispatched at the start of the film. There's a lot of pedigree here. There's a lot of history for people who went on to do greater things. I mean, we talk American Graffiti, writing on Raiders of the Lost Ark, those kind of things. These are huge events in cinema. So, and you and I, we appreciate that. We can give space and honor that. And
Absolutely.
still honor films for the time they were in. I don't ever try to look at things just totally in the current lens.
I think that's very important.
Yeah, it detracts from what was going on at the time and the way people perceived. And, it wasn't a time of CGI. We weren't spoiled by all of these computer things, and people had to be creative on the budget that they had, more so than perhaps today.
I had the very good fortune that when I was growing up, the late night films were usually from like the 1930s, occasionally even the late 20s. And you had to take them for what they were. And I learned to appreciate that very early on. Certainly, if you watch any film from the early 30s, it's technologically very different from what you see today. But if you understand that as part of the charm, they're very good.
And that's a good segue for your other library of horror, because a great example is Metropolis.
Yes.
Which you look at that, and it had some amazing effects for the time, and those techniques were still used decades later.
Oh,
They
yes.
influenced many filmmakers. I don't know if you want to speak to your past library of horrors, because you've actually done a few even before the recent start
that's
of your
true.
series.
Yeah, we've done some very interesting ones. One of them was The Son of Ingagi. And it's another one that you have to take for what it is. It was part of the African-American cinema that was very big in the 30s and 40s during the age of segregation. And there was an entire industry devoted to making films for an African-American audience that were different from the main releases that big studios were doing. Son of Ingagi is a good example of this. But the budget is much lower than something coming out of a major Hollywood studio would have been. And you have to take it at that level. You have to say, this is how this film is made. That's often true for horror films, no matter where they're coming from. But if you're willing to allow that that lower budget is not a problem, it's a wonderful film. There were a number of very interesting films we did in the first season of Library of Horror. We did The Ghoul with Boris Karloff. We did White Zombie with Bela Lugosi, which is another one. It's very early 30s. The sound is handled very differently than later films. It's before they really understood how to use a soundtrack. There are scenes that I believe have music behind them, but it's not done the way you'd see it later. And there are large portions where there is no sound behind, which would not necessarily be the case in later films. But as long as you understand this is the era, it's quite effective.
Yep.
And
you did Carnival of Souls.
Oh my goodness,
which
yes.
Maybe have some similarity to some of the things we're talking about even in this film today.
Well, Carnival of Souls was very interesting in that it was the only film of its kind that its maker ever made. The maker of that film mostly did industrial films, but for whatever reason, he wanted to do a cinematic film. And I think that he had hoped to move into that as a career, but was not able to. But the one film he did is an absolute classic on a shoestring of a budget. And you do have to take it as being on a shoestring of a budget. but within that context, it's very effective. The makeup is minimal, but it works.
Well, you just reminded me of Herschel Gordon Lewis, coming from a different background. I think he was into sales. I just had to look him up. So if you saw me typing, I want to make sure I call out his name, but I don't know if you've seen if he did all the gore on a tight budget, but he came from a direct mail advertising executive background, and then he went into film similarly. And sometimes people do that.
That's true.
So that's a whole wide thing. I'm not even sure where Roger Corman came from. That would be an interesting one to talk about, what his prior background was before filmmaking. But
that's true.
So many influential figures like that they may have small cult films, but yet they leave a lasting impression on a number of filmmakers.
Absolutely. And talking about Carnival of Souls, if you've seen it once, you'll never forget it. When we did that, I remember talking about it with Marianne Kay, who was one of the principal people at Witch School at that time, and who now does mymysticgems.com. And she had seen it in theatrical release when she was quite young. And it had definitely left an impression, because it has no special effects to speak of. It's very low budget and still incredibly atmospheric and full of suspense, which in the end I think is worth far more than a big budget or a lot of makeup. And I think for me, that's one of the things that I like about the kind of film that we're looking at here, that it often is on the lower end of the budget scale, which means they have to be more creative. And you can see some really interesting things that if they'd had all the money in the world, they would never have done.
Well, and the bottom line is, it's great to look at the trajectory of film over the decades. And in particular, we're talking about the horror genre, just to see how that's traveled from the 30s to the 40s, the classic Universal monsters, all the way up, the Hammer films. I really feel like that would be a great library of horror, just to pick a discussion point of a few of those across the decades, and look at that trajectory of how our perception of horror and the execution of it has played out over time, and the main players like this we're talking about.
Yeah, that's true. It's
a statement of human journey, right? In a lot of ways. Cinema is that, how we look at the world, how we see things over time.
If you look at those horror films from the early 30s, they truly frightened people. Some of them were banned in certain countries because they were considered too frightening for people to watch. But you look at them now and you wonder why. We are far more desensitized to such things today than our ancestors were, which is interesting because I think we overall live with less violence than their world knew. Especially if we look at that generation between the two wars. They had already lived through the First World War, which was full of carnage and horror, and were not long after to plunge into the second one, which was full of carnage and horror. But Frankenstein upset them.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Well, the thing is, we've democratized the access to these violent images through social media and through just visual media that we have over the years. So I guess in that sense, that adds to the desensitization. The more you see it, the more it's out there, the more you're exposed. So
that's true.
But not to keep belaboring it, but Spielberg did a great job with Jaws to kind of take advantage of some of those old principles. If things aren't working out on your budget, or the shark's breaking, just don't show it all. Use the imagination and let that fill in the gap. And it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. People were absolutely terrified of that big rubber shark. And I remember people wouldn't go to the beach. The beaches were half deserted the year that came out, and for several years after. So the horror is a very effective genre.
Yeah, and even the TV trailers would knock your socks off for Jaws. I remember seeing that in a hotel, and that was enough
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, with that, I want to thank you for joining us for Messiah of Evil on the Library of Horror, and we'll be back with another film next month, and I hope you will join us then. Until next time, thank you, and may your blessed be.
Aromagees Botanica, a metaphysical store for mind, body, and spirit. Oils, herbs, candles, crystals, teas, handmade soaps, tarot cards, everything you need on your magical journey. Daily psychic and tarot readings, classes, witchcraft, pagan, and hoodoo supplies, most of it made in-house. Try our free Dress Your Own candle station. From spiritual gifts to ritual supplies to religious books, we have the widest selection of metaphysical products in all of Tennessee since 1999. It is our goal to inspire everyone to explore their spirituality in their own way by offering information and products in a nurturing multicultural environment. Open 7 days a week. 223 Donaldson Pike, Nashville, Tennessee, or visit us online at aromagees.com.